Hello, everyone. We are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Hinson.
I'm Dr. Donnelly.
And you are all very welcome to our Conflict Management 101 brief webinar today. So thank you for joining us. We hope you had a nice President's Day if you were off, or even if you weren't like us. And that wherever you are warmer than Dr. Donnelly is right now. In North Carolina in a very cold trailer. So hopefully everyone else is a lot more comfortable than she is, but we soldier on.
Yeah, guys, I haven't felt my feet in days. So anyway, we're gonna wave goodbye from a camera perspective, and you're gonna see PowerPoints for the rest of this. So we will see you again at the end.
Right, so this is the important part of the webinar at the beginning, and I liken it to, if you walk into the wrong lecture hall or you're walking to the wrong business meeting, you get the room wrong and you're like, oh, everything looks like it should, but I'm not in the right place, until somebody starts talking and you go, oh, I'm not supposed to be in this classroom. So this is the part where we check to make sure that you're all in the right classroom. So you're in the right place if you want to make sure that you are leading your people well from a leadership position in your organization, particularly dealing with conflict. You want to learn or hear about some conflict management approaches that you might not have heard about before. And you've had possibly a couple of severe or even just minor conflicts in your office, which if you are in a leadership position in an office where you manage human beings, you have had conflicts, right? So just a quick reminder, we will be taking time out for questions at the end. So if you do have questions throughout that you want to save till the end, or feel free to pop them into the chat box. I'll be monitoring the chat box the whole time. And so if it's something immediately relevant to what we're talking about, or you need clarification on something, feel free to pop it into the chat box. But otherwise, we'll be taking questions at the end. And as a reminder, for all of you lucky, wonderful people that are staying with us through the whole webinar, we will have our drawing to win a free 2-on-1 strategy session as well. So be sure you stick around for that.
So who are we, now that we've made sure you're in the right place?
Great question.
Fantastic question. Who are these random girls? So I'm Dr. Donnelly. I'm talking and I have the long hair in that picture.
And I'm Dr. Hinson, and I'm talking and I have the short curly hair in that picture.
And in the rest of our lives too, by the way.
Not just in that picture, but all the time.
All the time. We have been friends and colleagues for almost 9 years now, which is completely insane.
Yeah, pushing a decade.
I can't even fathom it. So we are both Americans, clearly, but we met in Belfast, Northern Ireland, while we were working on our social science postgraduate degrees. Before that, we have both been in business in various capacities for a really long time. I've been part of a family business and the management and leadership of it. Well, if anyone's been part of a family business, you know that I've been part of it since it started. And Dr. Hinson's had lots and lots of managerial experience in retail spaces, and we've both worked in a lot of nonprofits. And between our business experience and our academic training in how to organize and analyze cultures, we decided to start Abbey Research a couple of years ago in how to bridge those two knowledge bases. So in particular to this webinar, we have a combined 20 years of experience working in conflict zones around the world, both frozen conflicts like Northern Ireland. And then I've done extensive work in Colombia and South Africa and Rwanda. And then also inner city Philadelphia. So that's certainly a conflict zone in a lot of ways. And as we've been joking with people, we promise if we've helped warring paramilitaries have conversations with each other, we can help your office.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Applicable skills.
Applicable skills. So what are you going to learn today in today's webinar? Let's get down to brass tacks here. We're going to talk about the role of a leader in cultivating a productive conflict culture. Y'all, let's be honest, every culture has conflict. We're not going to tell you how to be conflict free, because conflict can be productive. What we're going to do is help you figure out how to make as much conflict productive as possible. We're going to teach you in that way. We're going to talk about how to quickly identify the severity of the conflict, especially if you've got a couple really dramatic people that are hyperbolic and kind of see the worst in all situations. We'll give you some tips to kind of cut through that and analyze quickly what the actual thing is. Talk about some de-escalation techniques, how to manage holding difficult conversations, because a huge part around conflict management is how to talk intelligently and calmly about the conflict. We'll also answer questions, as we said already, and we'll talk a little bit about our personal lessons in working in some of those conflict zones, some of which are offices and some of which are, genocidal organizations. So.
One of the things that Dr. Donnelly and I start with pretty much with every webinar that we do is we start by talking about emotional intelligence and self-awareness, because we really feel like from any position in an organization, you should really start with knowing more about yourself, particularly as it relates today to conflict management, because if you are in a leadership position, if you are in a position where you are dealing with managing or resolving inter-office, interpersonal conflicts, you need to know yourself. You need to know how you respond to conflict. You need to know your strategies for dealing with conflict in your own life and how you're going to react when that situation comes to you. So knowing yourself is the really first key step before you even get to know your people and how you can help them manage their conflicts. And, from an organizational perspective, from Abbey Research's perspective, we look at a whole host of cultural issues that you might be having in your office. And we really feel that if conflict is your current problem that you are in this webinar for, we really don't think it's your only problem. And it might not even be the root cause of the problem that's going on in your office. So if you're facing conflict or if you're struggling with conflict in your office, there's a whole host of other things that you could be having problems with as well, including employee engagement. You might be having some issues with customer or client satisfaction. You might, certainly if you're having conflict issues, you could be dealing with emotional and physical health of your employees. And really, they might not, if you're suffering from some of these other problems as well, they might be the root cause of the problem that is contributing to your conflict. And so they all really work together. So we kind of, while we're talking specifically about conflict management today, we want you to think about some of these other areas in your organizational culture that might be contributing to the problems that you're having.
So, okay, we got all that out of the way. You guys, I'm sure, have been tapping your toes and checking your watches. Why can't these ladies get on with it? Good news, we're getting on with it.
It is time.
So as we talked about the importance of knowing yourself, we're going to talk about practicing. The very first step to conflict management is practicing authentic leadership, because in order to manage conflicts well, everybody that is around you has to trust that you know what you're doing and that you're not manipulating the conflict instead of managing it. And so a few quick tips in that authentic leadership package. The first one is to be yourself. Whenever I say this, I think of the Disney cartoon Aladdin, where the genie is buzzing around Aladdin and he's a bee, and he literally says, "Be yourself." So I would like to emphasize, again, to be yourself. Knowing yourself is a constant journey. It is one that I think we as a human race has put a lot more emphasis on in the past, decade or so. But we all can do more work to know who we are, know what makes us tick, what are our ethical drivers, what are the non-negotiables in our lives. This is the kind of thing that you hear people talk about, emotional intelligence. We all need to have a high level of emotional intelligence about ourselves. We also need to know how to ask questions. This is my number one pet peeve in working with groups of people. I was actually on a phone call this week. I've set up a training with a government organization next week, and I got a voicemail, and I'm flying to attend it with some of my staff members. And I got a voicemail that just said, "Hey, we're moving the training a couple days, so we'll see you on Thursday instead of Tuesday." And I called the guy back and I said, "Well, the problem is that my flight leaves Thursday morning." So if he had voiced I was nervous and angry, I started the conversation a little bit hostile because I was really frustrated. And as soon as I said, "Listen, there's a flight involved," he backed off and he was like, "Oh, I guess I should have asked first." And I was thinking, like, yes, if you would have termed the voicemail as, "Hi, we're looking to move the training. Could you let me know if that's possible? Give me a call back," it would have been a different conversation. And that's the same case in a lot of things. listening actively. I'm a social worker, so this is one of the things we're graded on and talked about quick. Listening actively is something that involves your whole body and your whole focus, so that you can listen beyond the words coming out of someone's mouth to the rest of the context of who they are. By the way, we know these are really deep concepts, and we are happy to unpack these further and talk about them further in other areas, because we could do and have done whole trainings on each one of these bullet points. Also, speak authentically. Everybody knows when you're talking out both sides of your mouth. Everybody knows it. So if you don't know what's going on, say you don't know what's going on. Just say it productively. In the same way that when we teach customer service to people, we tell them, if you don't have the answer for the customer, tell them you don't have it, but then tell them that you'll get the answer. The same way for your folks. Hey, I'm not sure how we're going to solve this problem, but we are going to solve it, and here's the first step we're going to take. Is a whole lot better than, oh, this is no big deal, don't worry about it, we'll make it work. No, acknowledging and authenticating things is very, very important. So the reason we're doing this today, and we think the reason a lot of you signed up for this, is because we know we've got a lot of new friends on the webinar today who we've never gotten a chance to meet before, is that conflict management is an incredibly important skill for middle managers and upper managers, leaders of any kind. This includes parents and softball coaches and Girl Scout leaders. Conflict management is a critically important leadership skill. And according to Gallup, 70% of employees rank it as one of the top 5 things that they look for in employee satisfaction measures.
Right. So moving on to some tips, since it is such a critically important leadership skill, now we're going to get to giving you some tips on how to start managing conflicts when they arise. Because as Dr. Donnelly said, right, there's no perfect idyllic culture in which it is conflict free. Because human beings create conflict all the time, from low level to high level. It's, the history of the world teaches us this. So you're not going to get a conflict-free work zone, but there are ways you can manage it productively. So the first tip, usually for us as researchers, is to always start by gathering information. We're big fans of researchers here as doctors of social science. So start by gathering the information that you could possibly need to understand what's going on with the conflict. This is a really important part, and Dr. Donnelly is going to get even more in depth into it, but make sure that the feelings and emotions of the people involved in the conflict are being validated. So that's a really important setup step. And then you need to help start assessing the severity of the conflict. So, having mechanisms in place to help you do that is a big part, and we'll go into that as well. But that's really key, to assess the severity of the conflict before you even start to manage or resolve it. And then implement the necessary procedures and policies. That sounds fairly standard, right? But it's really key to make sure that you have the necessary procedures and policies in place as well, so that you can implement them once you've done all of these other steps. So we're going to start, as we like to do, with the research. Do the research. One of our pro tips in managing any sort of cultural issue: make sure you do the research. So speak to all the staff that are involved, collect the data and information so that you can analyze it and assess it, and really, really important to make sure that you do it immediately. Don't wait for the conflict to die down. This is an important part of self-awareness and knowing how you respond to conflict. And if your kind of gut instinct is to just say, oh, you know what, I'm sure people will feel different. People will feel better in a couple of days. It won't be such a big deal next week or in 2 weeks. I've got this really important deadline that I have to make in something else. We would advise against that. Make sure that you assess the conflict immediately and start working on resolving it, because that will show your people that you are an invested leader. One of the ways that they're going to look to your conflict management skills is if you recognize the conflict in the first place. And it's also really going to help you control the potential escalation, because if you let it sit, if you leave it lie, because you really want your team to focus on, getting that product launch out, it's going to fester. The conflict is going to change possibly into something else. It's going to bleed into those other areas that we were talking about at the start of the webinar. And it could escalate, and you will have lost the ability to influence that escalation if you just let it wait.
So Very, very key in this process, though, is that when emotions are heightened and you're gathering that information, one of the reasons that we don't want you to wait is because people need to know that their emotions are valid. Even if but hear us say that just because their emotions are valid does not mean that you act upon their emotions. So, for instance, we had a conflict in an office I was working in where two people were sniping at each other quite a bit. And one of them is very emotional in that she cries. She demonstrates her emotions through tears, and the other woman demonstrated her emotions through anger. And getting the two of them in a room on the first day while emotions were heightened would not have been intelligent. But I wanted to make sure immediately that both of them knew that their reactions were valid. And so we gathered the data and got their side of the story. And then I said, okay, let's come back tomorrow and talk some more. And that's kind of how you navigate that high emotion, but do not act on the high emotion, just gather the data of the high emotion. Part of this is that the backbone behind this is that we are big believers that as a leader, your priority really is that your people are physically and emotionally safe in the workplace. One of the other hats I wear, Abby Research is part of a larger network of companies, and some of our other companies are manufacturing spaces. And so those are governed by OSHA, and OSHA has a lot of opinions on what physical safety looks like in a workplace. We don't have nearly as many things that govern emotional safety. And so if you have kind of these policies like, hey, when there's a fight on the premises, if it's verbal, we take people to separate rooms, we talk to them, we let them leave if they have to, things like that. If everyone knows there's a certain way that major conflicts are handled, then that works. The smaller conflicts, the ones that just kind of flare up quickly in meetings and maybe aren't emotional, there should also be stuff in place to make sure that everyone's stuff is heard and things as such. And as you understand how severe that conflict is, that will come through the gathering of the data. And like we said kind of at the beginning, one of our big steps is to asking better questions. So we would say, here are some of the questions that you should ask immediately. How many people are involved in this conflict? Has anyone been physically or emotionally harmed? And have any company policies been violated? Now, those are really simple questions. I've had conflicts at work that involve physical altercations. Okay, well, that becomes separate. You need to get them out of the building, or this is what happens. And then you're gathering this data quickly, and not necessarily formally, but while you're managing things. Like we have a company policy at our manufacturing plant that if two people get into a physical altercation, they are both removed from the premises. Immediately, no questions asked, and everybody knows it. We solve the problem and we get to the root of the conflict once everybody is safe. So sometimes the conflict is, a lot of you guys might be in more office environments than in physical environments. So those things might be the yelling or getting in a fight, or if somebody plagiarized somebody's report, or if emails have been being ignored, or things as such, which don't often seem to us as dramatic as someone throwing a punch, but I think we all know they are. Especially because they fester and they can fester a long time. So if you have no policies, and we'll get into that in a little bit, if you don't have any policies for how you deal with conflict, we would encourage you to start by making sure these 3 questions are addressed, and that everyone in the organization knows that these 3 questions need to be addressed. And then of course, knowing the answer to these things is going to help you get into the de-escalation practices, which is what Dr. Hinson's going to talk about next. De-escalation is the conflict management transformation word for essentially getting out of the heightened emotions and making the conflict productive.
That's right. There's loads of different terms that Dr. Donnelly and I have come across in our professional experience in conflict management. But certainly how to de-escalate, how to bring down the tension from whatever level of severity you're at. And it could be something as large as what Dr. Donnelly alluded to, where there's a physical altercation, or it could be somebody comes into your office because a team member, never follows the instructions on how to refill the ink on the copier. And it might not seem like a big conflict to you in comparison to some of the other ones you've dealt with, but it seems like a big conflict to that person. which is something we've already talked about, validating those feelings and emotions, and it could potentially lead to other conflicts if it's not addressed. So we've run through some of these already for our de-escalation tips, but make sure that a safe environment is being provided for the people involved. And that's going to depend on what the conflict is and what necessitates a safe environment, or what defines a safe environment. So that comes from knowing yourself as well, but also knowing your people and knowing what they would need in a particular situation to feel validated and supported. Acting immediately, even if acting immediately means you don't necessarily deal with the heightened situation, but you show your people that you are recognizing the conflict and you're dealing with it. That is absolutely critical. Avoid confrontational situations. I don't think the picture on the slide is a confrontational situation, but really we cannot advise you more strongly to avoid a situation in which you bring everyone together that's involved, where public shaming or naming the conflict in the whole group is not a productive way to deal with the conflict, and is certainly not a way to de-escalate it. And practicing clear and open communication. We've talked about this throughout the webinar, but really making sure that you are clear on what your company policies and procedures are, and that everyone else is as well, because confusion around that can lead to escalating the conflict. If people don't know what's going to happen, or they're not sure what you're going to do or how you're going to handle the conflict, that can increase or escalate the conflict rather than de-escalate it.
And we'll see too, one of the things that we hear that escalates conflict quicker is a perception of favoritism on behalf of the leader to other people. So having clear and open communication is going to help you avoid the perception of favoritism. That
is correct. So one of the questions that we like to ask people when we're dealing with teaching conflict management is, have you considered maybe some different methods for resolving the conflict? Have you thought about maybe the necessity of having a mediator or a third-party negotiator on contract that you can bring in for some of these situations? And one of the methods that I have a lot of experience with, I worked with a nonprofit in Northern Ireland that dealt with restorative justice, which is a method of conflict resolution that can work in offices. And it's a much more communally based principle, and deals kind of with a holistic healing around conflict resolution. So that might be something that could work for certain scenarios in your office. So, do some research and gather some information about the different methods, and they might be more productive for you than some of the methods that you have been using. Because as we said already, every culture has conflict because cultures have people. The key is to be proactive and to manage it productively, and to look after your people from a leadership perspective, and ensure that they feel validated and supported, and to go from there. So one of the things that you need to do, and we talked a little bit about developing procedures already, is to make sure that you have a thorough conflict management standard operating procedure. If you don't have one in place, we would highly encourage you to start developing one. That is something we would be more than happy to work with you on and support you through as well. Have clear and open communication about these policies. It's not just enough to have the manual sitting in an office somewhere. You need to make sure that all your people know what these procedures and policies are, and that they're all on board with them. And then, as we talked about really from the beginning, you need to practice being yourself, as Dr. Donnelly said with our wonderful Disney reference. Be self-aware, know yourself, and be yourself in front of your people, because if they see that you're managing a conflict strictly based on policies and you're not necessarily being authentic with them in dealing with the conflict, you're going to run into even more problems. They're not going to feel that you've built enough trust with them, and they're not going to buy into whatever resolution or whatever method you have devised for managing that conflict.
So guys, we know that this has been a bit of a fire hose kind of thing.
Whirlwind. Woo!
So much information on conflict management, so many facets of it. But here's the kind of really quick, if you take nothing else away, take this, is that conflict management, the ability to manage it well, comes from being a trustworthy leader. And that listening to your people, providing the support, and clearly communicating official policies and procedures are all going to go a really long way. Now, if you're like us, you're listening to this and being like, fine, that's all beautiful. How in God's name do I do that? Or I think I'm doing that really well. How do I make sure I'm doing it? All that kind of stuff. We understand, again, that this is so intense in so many things.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for watching the webinar. We hope that it was everything you dreamed and more.
Yes.
And this one was edited, of course, but we would love for you to be able to join us live for the next one, which it will have lots more interactive opportunities, time for you to ask questions, and opportunities to win prizes.
What? So how can you find out about our webinars? That's a great question.
Great question.
If you're watching this replay back on YouTube, there will be a link to sign up for our newsletter in the show notes below. If you are watching this on our website, just scroll down to the bottom of the page, sign up for the newsletter.
You'll see a box that says Research Digest and a little thing. Type your email in there and
away you go.
Away you go. We'll see you for the next one.
Follow us on all of our social media if you want to as well. We post about our upcoming webinars and all sorts of things of interest there as well. So we hope you've enjoyed this replay, and we really look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.
See you later from the Good Doctors.
Bye.